Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Lesson learned by Morbid Daydream. Halloween has always been my favorite part of the year. You get to dress up as a gory, spooky being and get candy. What's not to love? Having said that, my friends and I continued the tradition of trick-or-treating long after our little kid years. Though some frowned upon it, we thought it was one of the funniest things in the world to do. Living in a small town does that to you. It was last Halloween that things went from playful to dangerous. Before I continue, however, I just want to say that what happened was because of our own stupidity. It was our own fault, plain and simple, so don't go and blame it on religion. My two friends, whom I'll call A and friend B, I had just discovered the religion of Wicca a few weeks before. Friend B's mother was Wiccan and had let us borrow a few books to read up on since we were curious about it. It was around midnight, and we had just gotten back from commandeering my mother's car to take a visit to the cemetery. It was a few miles out of town. We didn't go to ruin any graves or pitiful things like that. We'd gone to simply admire the stones and just be away from everything else. None of us had gotten out of the car, being as when one of us is freaked out, the panic spreads like a disease. But as I was saying, we were back in my trailer, twirling around our glow sticks, when we caught sight of the books on Wicca, which B had brought over. Friend A, who was hypersensitive and knew more about Wicca than B and me, thought we should cast a circle. For those of you who have never practiced or studied Wicca, it means to cast spells or thank the deities and stuff like that. Being a noob, I thought it'd be okay, so we gathered some candles and sat in a circle on my living room floor. We went through the process of purifying the circle and said words that A suggested. Friend A still won't say what those words meant, but I know enough that they weren't good. It was a few nights later that I learned never to be that reckless again. I had most of the lights on in our trailer, and I was walking to the couch so I could eat supper. My mom's room is to the right of the living room, and so I had a pretty good view as the door to her room slammed shut with force. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. It felt like it might jump straight out of my chest. I set my plate down and sat on the couch, curling myself in a ball and looking out the now-closed door. I thought it had been closed, but I was wrong, because the door was slightly ajar. A pale white face with empty eye sockets peeked through the slit in the door, looking straight at me. At first I thought I was just imagining things. I hoped I was imagining things. I looked away and opened up my laptop, which had been on sleep mode the entire time, and messaged one of my friends that lives a couple of blocks away, asking if I could stay the night at her place. After she said yes, I closed down the computer, and that's when I began to hear voices, both male and female. They sounded right next to me and far away at the same time. I couldn't decipher what they were saying. They were speaking in a different language, so I just left everything on in the house and ran out of there as fast as I could. The next night, friend A and the one I'd stayed with, friend C, came to my house with me so we could get more clothes to wear for school. We were sitting in the living room on the couch when friend C's phone went off, saying that I'd texted her. She asked why I texted her, but I told her, no, I didn't text you, and showed her that my phone had been in my pocket the whole time. Her face went pale, and when she showed me the text, that's when we got the hell out of my house. The text read, "Did you hear the voices too?" A couple of days later, we went back again at night. This time it was only friend A and me. I was sitting in the chair adjacent to the couch, which is what friend A was sitting on. He was staring at my mom's room. The door was open so I could actually see inside of it. I was pretty sure I was stuck in psychological hell when I saw a black, shadowy figure peek out from behind the doorframe. It looked like it was waving at me. Hating to be afraid and being the dummy that I am, I glared at it. I can't remember if it had eyes or not, and for that I'm glad. While the one by the door was still looking at me, I'm sure it was looking at me, another figure began crawling up the wall in my mom's room, and then onto the ceiling like it was showing off. Friend A asked what I was glaring at, but for a few seconds I couldn't say anything. I couldn't look away from those shadowy figures. I was finally able to tell her, and we promptly got away. On the way to friend C's house, I would constantly see black figures peek out from behind the trees, and some would even jump out and then back behind the trees like they were playing a game. School was hell the next day. I kept drawing the black figures, and I just couldn't focus. My mom had been at her boyfriend's the whole time this was happening, and so I told her what was going on. She went into her room and prayed, and nothing's bothered me since, but now I hardly ever go into her room, especially at night. I've had paranormal encounters before, but never again will I be as afraid as I was at that time. Halloween Cruise, submitted by Dana. One year when I was 16, my parents took me on a cruise the last week of October. It was a strange time to go, but my dad had to cancel our normal trip because of work, and he found a way to upgrade our rooms and reschedule at the same time. It wasn't one of those themed cruises, just a normal one like we always took. We were frequent cruisers. This time, I begged to take a friend, and my bestie at the time, and who still is, was my friend Erin. It took a lot of begging and pouting, but her parents gave the okay as long as we took our schoolwork with us and had it checked by my parents every day to make sure we were actually doing it. Honestly, it was the same as when we went places at Easter time too, so whatever, it wasn't a big deal. We left Miami for a 5-day cruise through the Caribbean, and I remember the first day it rained, so Erin and I did a whole bunch of assignments so then we could just relax the rest of the trip. My parents checked it off, and that's exactly what happened. Our room was right next to my parents', and it was exciting to not be staying in my parents' room for the first time. The next day, it was gorgeous out, and we decided to get a jog in before most people got up. Dodging other people on a ship gets tedious if you want to run. As we made our laps around the ship, I noticed this guy looking at us each time we passed him. He looked a little bit older than us, like in his late 20s. I mentioned him to Erin on our last lap, and this time when we went by, he wasn't sitting in a chair. He was kind of standing there at the rail looking down the walking track, totally waiting for us to come by. For some reason I slowed down. I was getting the creeps for some reason in my soul, and I pulled Erin to the side and we went to another part of the deck to stretch and get some water. As we were stretching, more people started to come out of their rooms, so I stopped thinking about that guy. But just when we got up to go back to our room and go to breakfast, we both heard a voice say, "Your butt looks great in those shorts." Remember those shiny nylon Umbro shorts? We were both wearing them. We both played soccer. I looked around, but I didn't see anyone staring at us or anything. And like I said, more and more people were now out and about. We went back to our room. My dad had upgraded us to balconied rooms in the middle of the ship on the second to lowest level. He was a stickler about this, after once getting a hoity-toity room on an upper level, and all we heard were deck chairs scraping and obnoxious people partying in the pool at all hours of the night. Anyway, we showered and then went to a buffet with my mom and dad, and during our meal, I looked over and saw the same guy on the other side of the room staring at me. I pointed him out to Erin and she said, "Well, he is kind of cute." My mom asked who we were talking about, but we just giggled and said no one, and we should have spoken up right then and there. For the rest of the day, no matter where we went or what we did, I would turn around and see this guy. He never came right over to us, but he always seemed to be around. I told Erin it was creeping me out, but then again I thought, it is a cruise ship. I mean, no matter how big the ships are, you're bound to see the same people over and over. I did notice that there weren't a lot of people of our age. I guess maybe that's because of the time of year. I mean, normally when I was on a cruise, I made friends with other kids my age and made lifelong friends too. But anyway, the next morning we got up to run again, but outside our door was a paper package. It was clearly there for me or Erin. It wasn't like someone dropped it. Inside was a pair of skimpy satin panties with a note that said, "I'd like to see you in these." I did the, "Oh my God," typical of a 16-year-old girl, and Erin burst out laughing. The funniest thing to us was that they were brown. Not like beige or skin tone, they were like chocolate brown. We couldn't believe it, and immediately we thought it was the creepy stalker guy. That day we were making a port stop, and that's when we finally ran into him. Again, we didn't say anything to my parents. When we got to the port, Aaron and I broke away from my mom and dad and were in this little shop looking at island jewelry when, guess who pops in? This time he didn't just stare at us from afar. He came over and introduced himself as Tony. Before he could say anything, being the saucy gal that I am, I told him it was gross that he left us those panties. He looked shocked and said he didn't do that. Yeah, right. He said he was just really shy and wanted to say hello earlier, but was afraid we'd tell him to go away. Aaron kind of said that he was creeping us out by staring at us, but for some reason she was keeping the conversation going. He also denied saying anything to us while we were running around, and until this point, truth be told, we really didn't have proof that he was the one who said anything. He said he was 17, but like I said, he looked a little bit older. He told us that he was on the ship with his grandparents and that they really only wanted to stay on the ship and he was getting bored with no one his age around. After a bit, it seemed like he was okay, so we began walking around together, and after we told him our names, he told us more about himself and said that he was from Marco Island. Eventually, it was time to head back to meet up with my parents, so we said goodbye and left. He was following us from behind, but I told him that I wasn't allowed to date boys, and my father would flip out if he was around. None of that was true. We went back to the ship to get ready for dinner. When we were back in our room, it dawned on me that he was probably lying about everything. Just talking about him made me rethink his story. The next day we did see him standing and talking to an older couple, so again, I flip-flopped. That night there was some dancing after a more formal meal, so Aaron and I were out having fun, and of course, here comes Tony. He started dancing with us, and we just said we had to go and hurried back to our room, and found that someone had been in it and had gone through our things. I went fast to my mom and asked if she had been in our room, and she said no, and my dad wanted to report it to security, which he did. They came out and found that using the keycard was pointless. Even though it made the sound and the light came on, basically you could open the door with nothing. My dad went crazy, and they said they would fix the issue right away. A maintenance person came out and said that it was working properly again, and we went to sleep after checking to see if anything was missing, and there wasn't. The next night was a Halloween party, but no one had costumes or anything. Right on cue, Tony came over to us. He seemed really sweaty and worked up about something, and eventually he wandered away, and we enjoyed the rest of the night without his company. That's until we got back to our room. Someone, I wonder who, had gotten into the room and masturbated on my clothes, my shorts in particular. I almost threw up, and Erin screamed when she saw it. I mean, it was so gross, I just threw them out and washed my hands about 8 times. My parents got back from the party, and we told them, and my dad again went crazy. Another call to security, but this time the door was working fine. My father decided to switch rooms right then and there, but 2 things happened that night. Aaron and I couldn't sleep, and we decided to go for a walk around the deck and look at the stars. While we were doing that, Aaron had to go to the bathroom, and I just stood at a rail waiting for her, and that's when Tony came up behind me, grabbed my chest, and started kissing my neck. I yelled out and pushed him back, and when he turned to run, I kicked him as hard as I could, soccer girl power, and he ran away. Aaron came running over, and I told her we had to get back to our room. Before I could even tell my parents, there was a yelling from our old room. Tony had gotten in, but didn't know my parents had switched rooms. It was dark, my parents were asleep, and when my mom woke up, she thought it was me in the room. My dad turned on a light, and there he was, standing with his pants down and redoing what he was doing before. My dad jumped up, slammed him down with my mom screaming. She finally got her senses and called security as my dad held this freak down. Tony was hauled off to his own room and was confined there for the next 2 days until we got back to Florida. His real name was Lorenzo, and he was 26. and he was on the ship by himself. We pressed charges, and the police got him when we returned. He got convicted of a bunch of things like lewd behavior, assaulting a minor, and at that point it didn't really matter to me. I mean, the trip had been ruined for all of us. I haven't been on a cruise again, and after learning that someone had gotten a copy of our room key, I don't think I trust any cruise ship anymore. So, to Creepy Lorenzo, I hope I never meet you again, freak. Halloween in the Park, submitted by Saucy Gal. There's a park that I grew up near that's kind of famous in our area for a ghost. It's a place you can look up called Whitnall Park. I wanted to share the time I went out there with some friends on a Halloween night a long while back when I was 17. This was at the prime of all those ghost shows on TV, around 2005. It seemed like overnight all these ghost hunting groups popped up in my area of Wisconsin. I never really got into it. I mostly laughed at the shows as they were pretty stupid, and the South Park episode making fun of them is still one of my favorite episodes of South Park. Having said that, I have to say I did have an interest in ghosts and stuff, just not the lame trying to get famous people. My boyfriend Eric was totally into it and still is, and he's the reason we did what I'm about to tell you we did on Halloween that year. We were too old for trick-or-treating, but Eric and my friends Bill and Steffi and I were hanging out at my house. We were talking about all things spooky, and Bill was grilling Eric about local haunted places, and that's when he brought up Whitnall Park and the legend of the ghost woman there. Inside I was all, yeah, okay, but I was interested in a skeptical way. The story was about a woman who lost her baby. I mean, seriously, how many of these things start out just like that? The legend says that if she sees you, she'll scream about her lost child. Bill asked Eric if he'd ever seen the ghost, and he said no. So Bill said, well, let's go out there right now. It was around 11 o'clock, and we had nothing better to do. So we got some flashlights and headed out. My house was about a half mile from the park, and no one is supposed to be there at night, of course. Where we were going, there was a golf course and a building that did have security, but we figured we'd be far enough away so as to not arouse suspicion. We walked down a main road with our flashlights off because there was like a 3/4 moon and it was clear. When we got to a field, we crossed and went through a parking lot. It was dead quiet, no pun intended. We hadn't seen one car since leaving my neighborhood, so that was a good thing. Eric knew the way best, so we all followed him to this really pretty waterfall. You can look it up. It is really pretty, and it's super tranquil during the day. But this was Halloween, and at night, so everything had that spooky vibe, even though we were laughing most of the way out there. Eric said that while the ghostly woman was seen in different parts of the park, she was most often seen at the waterfall. Bill and Steffi were totally into things, and I was too, but again, still kind of rolling my eyes. We could hear the water, and pretty soon we got to it and found a spot on the rocks to sit on and do what all ghost hunters do. Wait. With 2 teenage girls on the scene, you can guess we couldn't shut up for more than 5 minutes. They were all really serious about it, and I kind of wandered away because I knew I was bumming them out. I walked around in the dark for a few minutes before heading back, and when I got there and sat down, we got the shock of our lives. We heard a baby crying. I mean, honest to God, a baby out in the park at night. All of us looked at one another with wide eyes, and for the first time that night, all of us were scared. Part of me thought it might be a prank, but the crying was all too real and not someone faking us out. We flashed the flashlights all over the place, but we didn't see anything, just heard the crying. And that's when Bill looked behind us at the waterfall and said, "Sweet Jesus," and we all turned around. At the top of the waterfall, and I swear on my kids' lives, there was a woman looking down at us. She just stood there for about a minute before opening her mouth and screamed, "Get away from my baby!" Then the figure sort of floated back and into the trees and disappeared. For a second, I sat dumbfounded, and then suddenly we all scrambled to our feet and over the rocks back to the trail. We all ran as fast as we could back to the road, me being the least athletic and falling behind. At one point I looked back, and to this day, I think I still saw that woman watching us, but it could have been my imagination. We stopped to catch our breath, and everyone started talking at once about what we had seen. Obviously, we were shaken up and decided to go right back to my house. And when we got there, we said our goodbyes and that we'd see each other in school the next day. Now, here's the freakiest part. The next day, Steffi said her mom talked to her at the breakfast table and said she couldn't sleep at some point in the night and went outside to smoke a cigarette. When she was on the back porch, she saw a woman in white standing at the edge of their yard staring at her, and then she just faded into the back tree line. Steffi hadn't told her about our little adventure, and after some research, no one had ever reported the woman outside of the park. Did she follow Steffi home? And why? Although we did go back out there looking for her a couple more times over the years, we never saw that woman again, and we never heard that baby crying either. Bad Halloween Party, submitted by Wax Ecstatic. I'll call myself Bob for this. It happened when I was 21, and for fear of details getting back to me, all the names I'm going to use are changed. I will say this went down in 1998. I went to a big university in Florida, and I was looking forward to graduating because I was sick of school. When I left high school, I thought college was going to be different as far as jocks and bullies, but I was wrong. It was a D1 school, and the athletes weren't the problem. I was friends with a lot of the people you would recognize on some major league sports teams. But the frats were another thing. And I'm not going to lie, some of the sororities were brutal too. The party that I went to that Halloween, I found out that a fraternity and a sorority were in cahoots as far as hazing and crap like that. I didn't really have anything against frats and sororities, but this incident really changed my mind about the people in them. I did have lots of buddies in frats, and they were pretty cool. But this one that was holding the party was one of the worst on campus, and their sister organization was just as bad, and everyone knew it. The issue was, they also threw the best ragers. Somehow, and I don't know how, the frat had access to a 3-level building not too far from campus, and they had insane parties. Multiple kegs, a full bar on one level, pool tables, ping pong, darts, foosball, vintage video games. I mean, the list goes on and on. Everyone always wanted invites, and there was no real just show up and pay the $3 for your solo cup going on. And you either knew someone or came with someone who had been invited. There was also a section called the Love Shack, and you can figure out what went on up there. There was a bunch of old office rooms that had futons, or what we used to call flippin' fucks back then. It was pretty disgusting, but for people that were blasted and wanted to hook up, if you knew someone in the frat, they would take you up there. I never did it, but I did have to go up there one night, and it wasn't for some nookie. That Halloween, a friend of mine I'll call Ray got an invite plus one, and we didn't have any girlfriends at the time. We thought maybe we would meet some ladies there, and then if anything took off, we could just take off with them. It was a costume party, and as I didn't have much money, I went as the Fonz, and my buddy went as Indiana Jones. I mean, total poor man costumes, but what the hell. We got there pretty early, around 9:30, but the place was already hopping. We got our beers, saw a lot of our other friends, and were really having a good time. And at one point, the cops came, and after a couple of $100 out of the party kitty, they left and just said to not get too out of hand. I met this really nice girl who I'm still friends with to this day. I'll call her Rachel. She was a sophomore, but had just joined a sorority, the one affiliated with the frat party we were at. We played pool, and I remember losing badly and laughing about it. And some of her older sorority sisters pulled her away to talk to her. And when she came back, she said she had to go do something, but she would find me in a little bit. She gave me a peck on the cheek and disappeared into the crowd. I just kept busy drinking beer and hanging out with my friends. But a little while later, I started to wonder what was going on, as Rachel was nowhere to be found no matter where I looked. I asked around, and someone said that they saw her going to the rooms where the hookups took place, the old Love Shack. At first I got mad like she was just stringing me along, but I told myself to just calm down and ride it out. I mean, I liked her right away, and I didn't want to blow up over something that was no big deal and scare her off. Another half hour went by, and I saw her heading for the exit, and I busted my way through the crowd. As I got near her, I could see her flapper dress was ripped and she was crying her eyes out. I yelled for her, but she ran outside of the building, and it took me a couple of seconds to catch up with her, and I finally asked her what was wrong. It took her about 10 minutes to get it together and tell me what was going on, and we sat on a curb, and I gave her my jacket because she was shivering even though it wasn't that cold out. Finally, she gave me her story. She'd been hazed by her sorority, and this was not just silly teasing. She didn't know about this, but a group of her older sisters started something new that year. Along with the frat that was full of dicks but threw good parties, they were sending new members into the hookup rooms for mock rapes, and I'm not kidding one bit. The sisters were blindfolding the girls, putting them in rooms, and then frat brothers would come in and practically maul them. No rapes actually occurred, but Rachel said she screamed her head off and could hear her new sisters doing the same thing, with the bigs sitting out in the hall laughing. She was so upset and wanted to go back to her dorm, so I walked her there and made sure she was safe. Her roommate, who was not in Greek life, was just watching TV, and I said I'd come back if she wanted me to, and she did. But first, I went back to the party. I found my buddy and some other friends from the football and soccer team and told them what was going on upstairs. I think you can guess what happened next. All of us went up to the rooms, blasted by the two frat boys standing guard, and a brawl ensued. It quickly became clear that it was only 4 frat guys doing this, as the rest were elsewhere just having fun. True story. We kicked the shit out of all 6 guys while the sorority bitches just screamed or ran downstairs. As we were leaving, literally the rest of the frat guys were coming up saying they were going to kick our asses. And even though everyone was on the heavier side of drunk, we told them what had been going on, and they stopped. So much for frat bro love. The guys got another ass kicking by their own brothers. They had no idea that these people were doing that upstairs. Me and my buddy left, and I went to see Rachel, who was still very upset. And the next day, 2 of the frat guys tracked me down and said that they had wished we had told them what was going on before we went up there to kick some ass. But the guys who did it were getting kicked out of the frat, and the same was happening to the sorority sisters. I told them that they should be expelled from the U, but they didn't want to ruin their lives. So, okay, scare some girls within an inch of their sanity, but you don't want to ruin someone's life? Dickheads. Rachel and her new sisters quit right then and there, and they took stuff further. They contacted their national chapter, and the local almost got shut down. I do remember everything was suspended for both them and the frat for the rest of the year. Look, I'm not here to bash frats, and I'm not looking down on them or whatever, because, like I said, I had some really great friends that were brothers. But those guys in that frat were dicks, plain and simple, the same with the chicks. After I graduated, I kept in touch with Rachel, and still, after all these years, every Halloween I get a plain card in the mail that just says thank you, with her name at the bottom. Glowing Eyes by Country Guy 91. This one isn't super long and may not be very scary to most, but it's stuck with me for a long, long time. So here goes. It was Halloween night 2014. I was once again in my hometown of Richmond, Kentucky. My cousin, his girlfriend, and myself had been riding around and went out to get some candy to hand out to the trick-or-treaters when they came. We decided to take a shortcut back to his place, since we kind of got a late start because we lost track of time. It was around 6:45 p.m., and the sun was going down, which didn't help the fact that the road we took, Old Crutcher Pike, is dark, kind of creepy, and very crooked and narrow already. We turned down the road, turned on the headlights, and headed towards his house, which was about 2 miles away. It seemed to get darker the further down the road we got, probably because there weren't very many houses or lights around. I decided to roll the window down. It was particularly warm for October, around 63 degrees. Kentucky weather is crazy like that. So, now with the window down, I'm paying more attention as we pass by what few houses there are. We came across a couple of mobile homes next to one another, one with a carport, and directly across the road was a small, dilapidated shack. Then I saw it, and by the look on my cousin's face and sudden hurry to get off the road, he did too. Under the carport, at the back of 2 cars, as we drove by, we saw a man in black slacks, with a white old-timey shirt and a black vest and cane. He was standing beside a woman with a white lace-lined dress and a bonnet, just standing there staring at the shack, with big, glowing eyes that looked like reflectors. We got about 3 football fields away and pulled over. We both looked at each other and said, "Did you see what I saw?" We talked about it, and we both agreed we had. So we turned back around and drove back by, in the opposite direction, and saw nothing when we passed the house. We turned around, left the road, and went to his house, and ended up eating way too much candy because the kids had already stopped for the night. I believe what we saw was real, and I know that he does too. But for anyone who has a logical approach, I can't say that it couldn't have been set up. But if it was just a fake, just to scare people, and moved or something, it was a very, very good joke. Also worth mentioning, the land my cousin lived on and all around there is known for being on Indian burial grounds and really old farmland. Who knows? College Days by Dimitri W. Back when I was in college, there was an old dormitory that was empty and locked up. The first floor windows were covered up with thick black curtains, and the doors had chains and padlocks on them. Well, my second year of school, I got my EMT certification and started working for the campus EMS squad. That was easily my coolest job ever, and there were perks other students couldn't get. One of those were keys for everything. So obviously we used those keys to go everywhere, and most places were pretty boring. My now best friend, who was the other EMT I worked with, decided to take the old dorm for our hangout place. We would sneak in with friends and drink there on the weekends or nights where we didn't have class. We usually stayed on the first floor, just in one wing of the dorm, the one closest to the back entrance. We didn't stray because the place was dirty and had cobwebs. So, one night we were drinking in one room, and I believe it was on Halloween. We had set it up with tables and chairs that we had seized. We were all together. Nobody was missing, when someone very close to our room and very loudly screamed, "Who the fuck is there?" To which one of us drunkenly responded, "Who the fuck do you think it is?" A very confused voice responded back, "You're not coming with me then, John?" They sounded like they were walking away from us towards the center of the building, away from the stairwell. Incidentally, none of us were named John. A few minutes later, we could hear on the floor above us, and remember, this was a very old building with floors that were super thick, a rumbling sound that kind of shook the walls. The rumbling stopped right above us, and then had a giant crash. Shit officially got creepy, and we all ran up the stairs and made our way to the hallway above the one we were hanging out in. Right at where our room would be on the first floor was a giant filing cabinet on wheels. It was just there. Nobody else. You could see the wheel tracks on the floor because it was dusty as shit, but there were no other footprints around besides our own. We all fucking bolted without getting our stuff, not stopping to get our booze or turning off our radio or turning off our battery-powered lantern. Well, when we finally realized what was going on, we obviously had to go back and get our shit. But we waited for a few days. A friend of mine and I went to get it one evening. First we went to a window to see if we could see if our stuff was still there. My friend looked in, I didn't. He said he thought he saw somebody in the doorway. I told him he was acting retarded because of what had happened the other night. But we snuck in and made it to our room and got our shit. Somewhere, down towards the center of the building, we heard a door shut. It was completely dark. And then we heard a door closer open, and we didn't wait to find out what the fuck that was about. Now, I'm not a person who believes in supernatural stuff, and the same goes for my friends. But we decided that we needed to figure out what the hell was going on with this building. So about 6 of us devised a pretty easy plan to go about. We circled the building one night and checked all the doors and windows to make sure they were locked. Then we went to our usual entrance. We left 2 people on the inside of it to make sure nobody came in or out, and then the rest of us started going from dorm room to dorm room checking to make sure nobody else was there. We would say hello, and obviously we got no response. We made it through the hallway we hung out in, and our tension started to ease up. One of the people at the outside door moved up to where we had stopped, and we got to the second floor where the filing cabinet was. Because it was back at the original place with the wheel tracks there, and no fucking footprints. The tension that was gone now started to rise. We started doing the whole hello and no response thing again. We got about halfway through the hall, and one of us got the idea of saying, "Oh, come on, it's your friend Johnny." Then there was a giant thud below us. Muffled screams from the two we had left as lookouts, probably saying something along the lines like, "What the fuck was that?" A giant thud behind us on the same floor, where nobody could have been because we had went through those rooms, and we would have noticed somebody else slamming a door right fucking behind us. It turned into a race to get back the way we came, past the doors that just slammed, and as we got into our hallway we hung out in, we could hear doors opening and closing in a way that was something coming towards us from the center of the building. We made it a few hundred yards away before we all stopped running and made sure that we all had made it. We found another place to hang out after that. That building is now torn down, and a real dorm has been built in its place. We never put it together, but that place was never really a dorm, even though hallways were really wide. Some of the rooms had windows next to the doors like an office usually does, and that was the type of room we hung out in because it was a bigger room. Once in a while we would notice that the windows would get foggy too, like when you breathed on a window foggy, but it always happened on the hallway sides of the windows, like if somebody was looking at us through the glass and watching us. We never put any of those things together until after the whole fleeing and terror incident. Obviously, we never went back. Van Following Us, submitted by Local Heather. One year on Halloween, my friends and I were doing the whole neighborhood trick-or-treating and trying to hit as many houses as we could. It was me and my friends, I'll just call A, B, and C. Our neighborhood was a suburban development with 2 long streets on either side, with 6 streets cutting across one another. It made for a lot of houses, and we fixed routes to dump our candy collections at someone's house before setting out for more. We were more than a little greedy. Our parents hated it, but boy, we got a lot of loot every year. This particular year, we were going up and down the streets on each side when I noticed this old Astro van parked in front of a house. I remember making fun of what an older POS it was. I mean, it was a totally beat-up Astro van. We moved on, but when we got to the next street over, about halfway down, I saw it was now parked there. I pointed it out to my friends, and A said something like, "Hey, it's probably someone with a little kid, and they're just driving to the houses of people they know." I mean, logical enough explanation. On the last street, and right as trick-or-treating time was coming to an end, I happened to turn around, and I saw it again, this time behind us, and I noticed it was slowly driving along, like it was following us but keeping a distance. C said it was creeping her out, and she wanted to get back to her house, and we all started walking faster. There was nobody else out at this point, and C lived about 4 streets back from where we were. We started walking even quicker, but the van kept coming towards us. Finally, I said, "Let's just go down the next street and then cut between the houses." And that's what we did, and the van turned down the street, still following us. We ran through a couple of backyards until we came to C's house, and we went inside her garage to get our other candy bags we had left earlier in the night. This was dumb. We should have just gone right inside the house, and we also had left the garage door open. Sure enough, the van came cruising down her street and slowed down right at her driveway. It stopped there for a second, and then it drove off. We grabbed our candy, ran inside, turned off all the lights, and shut the garage door. C's parents were at some kind of thing at her church and wouldn't be home for another hour or so. But she had this big picture window in the front of her house, and we went to it and looked up and down the street as best we could. The van wasn't out there. We went into the kitchen to get something to drink, and that's when her older 17-year-old brother came in and said, "Why the heck are all the lights off?" We told him what was going on, and he just gave us a strange look when he flicked the light on. He said, "I'll be right back," and then he went outside. He was gone for a few minutes, and then he came back and locked the back door. I asked what was going on, and he said to just be quiet for a minute. He picked up the phone and called 911. We heard him telling the person on the line about this van that had been following us. It was now parked 2 houses down from theirs, and there was no one inside it. As everyone knows, Halloween is a pretty busy night for the police, and they said they would try to get out there, but it was not high on their list of priorities, as no one had been hurt, and it easily could have been someone looking for an address or something. Okay. So, we were standing there when we heard a loud bang from outside, and C's parents pulling up the driveway. Then we heard her father yell, "Hey, who are you?" We ran to the back door in time to see this person, dressed up like the Scream character, come running out of the garage side door and through the backyard. A few minutes later, we heard a little tire screech, and C's brother had gone out the front door and chased this person to the van, but that person had a head start. He couldn't catch up. The van took off down the street, and we were all freaking out. C's parents came in the house, asked if we were playing a prank, and who was the guy in the garage. What had happened was, when they got home, they had opened the garage door with their opener and saw this person standing there in the headlights. And that's when he took off and got away. C's father called the police, and a little while later an officer came out and asked for the whole story and a description of the van. None of us had ever gotten the license plate. But what was most disturbing was that on the side of our house where the person had run through, there was a roll of duct tape and a big claw hammer. I shudder to think what might have happened had C's brother and parents not come home when they did. Looking back, I think we were in more danger than we ever imagined. Uncle Mike, submitted by They Call Me Bruce. When I was in my 20s, me and my good buddies would go camping a lot. Weekends away from the girlfriends for raunchy stories, laughs, way too many Saranaks and smokes at my friends' family's land. So many cool memories out there, no doubt about it. It was the first time I'd ever heard coyotes or realized how big bucks could get, too. This was on property at the edge of the Catskills, and one Halloween, we decided to skip the parties and all that jazz and get one more weekend of hanging out in before the holidays and the snow started flying. Our campsite we always went to was off a dirt road that was off of another dirt road that still had farms and other houses on it, but those were pretty far away. You had to go down this little road that my friend's family always kept the grass trimmed low so you could drive down it. It ended at a spring-fed pond and a pretty solid place to pitch tents. They still have that land, although I live in Arkansas now. Kyle, Bill, and me set out after work on a Thursday night, and Halloween was the next day. The weather was nice during the days, and awesome cool nights were there too. We had loaded Kyle's truck up with firewood, got out our coolers and all our stuff, and set up camp. Kyle's dad told us that his uncle might be out there, and to be a little wary of him. Recently from our trip, in one weekend, his wife cheated on him with his business partner, and they basically looted their entire restaurant and cleaned out his bank accounts and then ran off to Mexico together. As anyone can imagine, he was more than devastated. He went a little crazy and spent a lot of time alone out where we were going. The first night was just lots of laughs and talking around the fire. And the next day on Halloween, we decided to go on a hike to a ravine not too far from where we were. That was the first time we saw Uncle Mike. He was fishing in the creek when we called down to him. He jumped about 2 feet in the air and grabbed his nearby rifle. When he realized it was just us, though, he breathed out and told us to not sneak up on him again. We asked him how things were going, and he said he was fine, but I noticed something strange. He didn't have any lure or bait or hook on his line. He kept dipping his line into the water with just a leader on it. I didn't say anything right then, but I knew something was wrong. Uncle Mike kept talking about all kinds of random stuff, too. One minute it was the New York Knicks, then a recipe he was making for his now closed restaurant, and then asking questions about Kyle's dog that had been dead for close to 4 years. We could tell something was off, but hey, he'd been through a ton of shit. Kyle invited him to our spot that evening. We were going to make steaks over the fire grate. He said he'd think about it, but it was nice that we asked. He was staying in a beat-up trailer they used for hunting not too far from where we were. So, that evening, after a few brews and lots more laughs, we ate, and then Bill got out his telescope. It was a pretty nice night out, and the stars were so much cooler out in the middle of nowhere with no light pollution. We looked at planets and stuff while tending to the fire and sampling the variety packs of beer we brought. That's when Uncle Mike came over. He'd walked up behind us and just stood at the fire. And finally, Kyle noticed and said, "Hey, Uncle Mike, want a beer?" He didn't say anything. He just looked into the fire. So Kyle went and got a cold one from the cooler and brought it over to him. Uncle Mike took it almost absent-mindedly, and opened it with his bottle opener, and still said nothing. By this time, Bill and I were looking at each other with these, "this is getting uncomfortable" faces. Finally, Uncle Mike looked up, and after a few seconds said, "Who the fuck said you could camp here?" After a pause, Kyle said, "Uncle Mike, it's your nephew, Kyle, Jim's son." Uncle Mike just stood there saying nothing. Then he looked back at the fire, finished his beer, and said, "I don't want any shit from you guys, and I want you gone first thing in the morning. Give me another beer." Kyle slowly got him one, and then, like nothing happened, Uncle Mike said, "Thanks, kid. Hey, what are you guys looking at?" It was like a light switch had been flipped. He was back to being himself. Bill told him what we were looking at and asked him to come check it out, and he did. I went over to Kyle and whispered, "What the fuck was that all about?" He said he had no idea, but it was clear Uncle Mike wasn't too stable upstairs. Uncle Mike hung out for about another half hour, then said goodnight and told us to be safe. After he was gone, we all started talking about how odd and actually sad it was. I mean, the guy's brain was cooked after his recent incidents. We got on with the night just talking, and were about to hit the sack when we heard someone coming down the road to our site. It was Uncle Mike again. This time he stayed at the edge of the firelight and didn't say anything until Kyle finally said, "Hey, Uncle Mike, what's up? Everything okay?" Well, it wasn't okay, because Uncle Mike came closer and he was holding his .30-06, still pointed at the ground, but holding it in front of him. "I told you fucking guys to get out of here, and now you're going to get trouble." Bill and Kyle had shotguns, but they were in the truck. I had my Smith & Wesson 9mm on my hip, but wasn't thinking about pulling it or anything. We all sat there quiet until he roared again, "Why the fuck are you here? Get your shit and get out!" This time he brought the barrel up, and Kyle said, "Whoa, whoa, 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 man. Put that thing down." Uncle Mike just froze there for another while and then yelled at us to get out again, but he didn't put the rifle down. I slowly unholstered, brought up the 9mm, and with a wavering voice said, "Uncle Mike, put the rifle down." Kyle looked at me and said something like, "What are you doing, dude?" And Uncle Mike looked at me and his eyes got big. He was back to being normal and said, "Jesus, kid, what are you doing?" Like he didn't even realize he was still holding his rifle pointed at us. He looked down, lowered the barrel, and said, "You guys okay?" Kyle walked over calmly and asked to see his rifle, and Uncle Mike gave it to him, and he started talking about its finer points. Kyle asked him to borrow it for the night and then maybe shoot it a little in the morning, and Uncle Mike said sure, and then he said, "All right, you guys, good night," and he walked away again. That was it. Bill dumped water on the fire, and without packing up, we all got into the truck and got out of there. We got to Kyle's house at about 2 a.m. and woke his dad up to tell him what was going on. At first he gave a shit about drinking and driving, but when we told him the story, he forgot all about that real quick. He called his other brother Dick, and both of them drove the hour out there to get Uncle Mike. They found him asleep and then hung out there till daylight when he woke up, and they took him to a doctor, which he agreed to, saying that he'd been having these bits of time that he just didn't feel like himself. He got some treatment and got things back together after a year or so, and I guess he's remarried and doing fine with a new restaurant. The day after that Halloween night, we went back to get our stuff, and that was one of the last times we were all out there together ever again. That was the first and last time I've ever pointed a gun at a human being, and I'll tell you what, it did make me feel like a big man. It scared the shit out of me. I remember physically shaking all the way home. That was one Halloween with a real-life scare that I will never, ever forget. Two Scary Halloween Happenings by Vox Populi 101. This is about two incidents that happened to me on Halloween. The first one was back a couple of years ago. It's believed in our culture that on Halloween or All Saints' Day, the souls of the departed would visit the houses of living relatives, mostly in the forms of big moths and other unusual insects. Many people prepare food and other favorites, light candles, and offer prayers, especially those who prefer to stay in the house. In my case, I was outside of our house at that time, preparing some candles, while the other members of the family were inside. So I lit 5 candles, just near our main door, and I was just sitting next to them. A few minutes later, I saw the flames of the candles grow and start burning sideways like they were being blown. Yeah, being blown by somebody, all 5 of the candles, and there was no wind. I was shocked, silently staring at it for a minute, realizing there was no wind. It was a little humid that time, after it rained late in the afternoon. The leaves of the trees were still, and nobody else was around. The blowing continued, and before I could think of anything to do, I just ran outside the gate, out to the streets where there were other people. In a split second of that moment, I was totally scared, deeply panting. A few minutes later, my father called me to get inside to eat. And just when I looked at the candles again, the candles were back to their normal flames, almost half burnt already. I told everybody about it, but nobody believed me. But no one could explain how the candles burned halfway down when they had only been lit just a few minutes before. The second story happened when I was married. It was also the same occasion of Halloween. I was outside our small porch lighting candles, carrying my youngest son, and I could clearly see the people inside the house since they had turned on all the lights. We had our dinner early, so my wife was already upstairs with our eldest son. I could see our maid finishing her chores in the kitchen, and my father at the living room TV watching. Just a couple of steps away from our kitchen is our bathroom. Anybody from the bathroom or kitchen going or coming can really be seen from the living room. So I was still outside enjoying the breeze when I saw someone of a woman form. I really did see her passing from the bathroom going to the kitchen clearly. I could still see her back when I called to our maid, "Jeng, panyang una ang suga sukansiya," which means, "Jeng, turn off the lights at the kitchen when you're done." To my surprise, she answered through the upstairs window, saying, "Wala pa ko nahuma, kuya," which means, "I'm not finished yet, kuya." Immediately, I felt shivers down my back, and I called my father, asking if anybody was in the kitchen. Maybe it was my mother. To which he yelled back, "Nobody." I hurriedly went inside the house, went up to our room and told my wife, and she said to just keep quiet about it. Later, she told me that she had also seen that woman, the same figure, but it passed right through our fence and then went through our house wall. I totally apologize if I butchered what I think was Filipino, so forgive me, I did my best. Maniac on Halloween, submitted by Tone Deaf. Back in 2009, my friends and I decided to sneak out to a local park for some beers on Halloween night, and we'd kind of sneak them out of my friend's grandfather's garage. It was me and my 2 boys, Jack and Donnie. We put the stuff in a duffel bag and then began the process of dodging anyone who might think we were up to no good. We were headed to a nearby state park in upstate New York. I remember it being pretty chilly, and we were all bundled up in hoodies and stuff. Once we were in a ways, we went to the trees where we knew there was a little clearing with some down trees to sit on. We were telling scary stories and just sipping on the cold Bud Lights. A little while later, we heard what sounded like someone walking through the trees. Of course, immediately we all thought it was the cops or a ranger who saw us go in here. So we really sat quiet for a minute, and the sound stopped. Donnie turned his flashlight on like a moron because that could have gotten us busted right then and there, but there was no one out there. We all agreed it was probably just a deer or something. So we each cracked open another beer, and I started telling the story about my uncle's haunted farm. Not 5 minutes later, we heard the sound again, but this time it was a lot closer. We shut up and waited, and the sound stopped. Donnie said maybe we should move to another spot, but that's when we heard this crazy yelling coming straight at us. Our flashlights went up and on, and here came this guy with no shirt on, a long-ass scraggly beard and what looked like military BDU pants. But that wasn't what the scariest part was. In his hand he had one of those machetes with the handle grip on it, and as he was yelling he was swinging it around. We were all shit scared, let me tell you. He stopped about 10 feet away and then stood just looking at us. He looked completely out of his mind and was breathing heavily. We could see the vapor from his mouth in the air. None of us knew what to do or say. Finally, he pointed the machete at us and said, "Know what goes on Halloween?" I looked at my buddies, and they looked at me. "I said, know what goes on Halloween?" And he was yelling it this time. "Trick or treat!" And he started walking at us. We scrambled to our feet and started running, leaving the bag of beer behind. This maniac chased us back to the footpath trail, yelling the entire time, and like scared rabbits, we ran deeper into the park instead of back to the road. Every once in a while, I looked over my shoulder, and there he was, maybe 20 yards away, slashing the air and yelling, "Trick or treat! Trick or treat!" over and over. For some reason, Jack made a right and went back into the woods, and Donnie and I took his lead. We all split up, kept running, and ditched into the woods at different points. Whether that was smart or not, I don't know, but at the time, I guess I'd have to say it was. When I was in the trees, I could still see the walking path, and I watched the guy run past all of us, still screaming trick or treat. For 5 minutes or so, none of us moved, and finally we emerged from the woods. When I did, Donnie was already out there, and there was no sign of the crazy guy. We called out for Jack and then booked it back to the bag, grabbed it, and then ran like hell back to my house. Thankfully, when we got there, my parents were asleep. We had a finished basement, and we snuck inside and finally caught our breath. Risking getting busted, we had a couple more beers and talked over and over about what had just happened. And then we heard it. A voice coming from the street. The same one we had heard earlier. The guy was running up my street by my house yelling trick or treat again and again. I turned off the lights, turned a movie on, and we hit our beers when I heard one of my parents coming down the second floor stairs. The basement door opened, and my mom called down and asked if we were okay. I said we were fine, and she said, "Okay, good. It sounds like there's some crazy guy outside in the neighborhood. Sleep tight, guys." She shut the door, and we all breathed a sigh of relief. We finished our beers, and I took a chance running them out to our garbage cans so as to get rid of the evidence. But all the while I was looking around me for that maniac, but I didn't see him again. Craziest Halloween I have ever had, for sure. Abandoned House, submitted by Rick B. 2. I grew up in this little town, and I guess you'd call it a hamlet. Like most little towns with some history, there's always that old house that no one lives in on the edge of things that everyone says is haunted. It was Halloween 1984 when I was 18. A group of my friends decided to go out there and check it out. The house was at the end of a long driveway that went through some trees so you couldn't really see it from the road. We reversed it about halfway up and parked my friend's car. The four of us, Brendan, Gary, and Wayne, were there with me, and we walked up to the house, and it was as dark as ever. Most of the windows on the first floor were boarded up, and a lot of the upstairs ones had been broken from people chucking rocks and shit at them. We walked through the tall grass surrounded the side and shone lights on everything. It was pretty creepy to be out there even at our age of 18. It was dark and quiet, except for some wind in the trees. We got to the back, and there was also a broken-down barn, so we went over to that first. There was a bunch of graffiti, but it wasn't like paint or anything. It was like these symbols burned into the wood. I poked my head through a doorway and flashed my light, and it lit up what looked like a fire pit. All the junk that was in there had been pushed away, and the remnants of a fire were clear as day. Just then Brendan said, "Hey, it looks like someone's in the house." We all spun around, and faintly through a broken window, there looked like a candle or some small flashlight was moving around. I said, maybe it's other people or kids out checking things out too. Gary led the way back, and we saw that the back door was open slightly, like someone had pried it open enough to scooch through. We had a little conference as to whether or not to go in, or wait out here for whoever it was, but we voted to go in. We all squeezed through the door and then listened. There was a faint scratching coming from up there, so Gary yelled out, "Hey, who's up there?" The scratching stopped. Again, we voted to go up, and the stairs to go up there were pretty solid, even though we shouldn't have all been on the staircase at the same time. I mean, we could have fallen through for all we knew. But we got to the top, and me and Brendan went to the room where we saw the light. The door was off the hinges, and all that was in there was a chair nailed to the floor halfway into the closet. That door was also gone. No one was in there, but the chair looked like it had red paint all over it. Later, we found out more and made a different guess. We searched the other rooms, but no one was up there. And just then, Gary was looking out a back window and said, "Hey, there's someone outside!" And we all ran over. There was someone out there. We could see a dark shadow with a flashlight on the grass walking towards the barn. We all ran down the stairs and squeezed out the back door, never thinking that we were in any kind of danger. We ran to the barn, then I went inside and flashed my light around again. There was a little plastic tub in that fire pit that wasn't there before. So I went over to it, and I froze. My friends came up behind me, and they did too. Inside and smeared on the plastic tub was what looked like blood, and there was a bloody ball gag next to it. There was a shuffling noise at the other end of the barn, and through a back doorway, we saw a dark shadow walk out. I nearly bowled over all my friends backing up, and all of us ran outside and back to the car. We knew we had to tell someone what was going on, but we also knew we would get in trouble for being out there. I told my friends, "Man, this is some crazy shit. We had to do the right thing." We went to the police station and told the guy there what we had done and what we had seen. At first he thought we were putting him on, but after a minute he could tell we weren't making it up. He made a call on his radio system, and a policeman responded and said for us to meet him out there. We did. He asked us why we had been out there, had we been in the house, and we were straight with him about everything. He went into the barn, came back out and got all of our names, addresses, and phone numbers, and then told us to go home. Over the next few days, we all got calls from the police about what had happened and what we had seen, and way more questions. All of our parents were pissed off, and that way parents get pissed off when police call, despite the fact we didn't really do anything. I guess that's just the embarrassment of being a parent. We never heard anything about it again, other than a notice in the police blotter of our local newspaper. It only referenced a break-in at the house. I will go to my grave wondering what actually had happened out of that house. The Voice from the Cemetery, submitted by Bro Butter. When I was in my 20s, I moved out on my own and was living in an apartment with my friend Joe. It was a great place, an upper and the landlord lived downstairs, but for only half the year. Every mid-October, he and his wife went to their place in Florida, and they didn't rent the other part of the double to anyone. During the summers, he worked at a local cemetery. He gave us a break on our rent during those months that he was gone if we took care of everything and helped do anything that might need his attention if he wasn't there. Super nice guy. He always told us about how cool the cemetery was, even though that was kind of creepy. One Halloween, we were going to have some friends over to just have a chill night and watch some movies and stuff. Around 7:30, Lacey, Brooke, and our other friend Greg came over, and we all hung out and talked and just enjoyed the night. After a while, Greg said that while we were having fun, we should do something scary. I mean, he said it was Halloween after all. I asked him, like, what? And we all shot some ideas around. After a little while, Joe brought up the cemetery where our landlord worked, and it was decided we would go there. It was only a couple of miles away, and we weren't really considering that it was probably illegal to be there at night. I mean, what can I say? We went anyway. Everyone piled into my Camry, and I drove to the street where the cemetery was, but then I parked another block away. The cemetery is, and still is, right in the town that I lived in. It was really old and was surrounded with a tall wrought iron fence with trees around it too. In the day, it was a very beautiful park-like setting, very serene, but at night it was pretty scary. When the coast was clear, we went in and were just looking at gravestones and talking about how sad it was that some of the people passed away pretty young, and also talking about how long some of them lived. We got to one of those larger buildings that were more for multiple souls from the same family, and I've always thought those places were kind of creepy, like their ghosts were all inside right behind the door. Maybe even listening to us as we walked by. Lacey was reading the names of who was in there, and one was a little boy who died when he was only 10. We all said how sad that was, and Joe, who was not super religious, said a little prayer, hoping that he was in a better place. Just then, I thought I heard a little knock coming from the vault. We were about to walk away when I told everyone to be quiet for a second and just listen. I wasn't imagining it. It was soft, but it was there. As we were walking away, Greg said it was probably nothing, and maybe just a branch or something hitting the side of the building, when Lacey pointed out there were no trees near it. We got back to my car, drove back to my apartment, and the girls opened a bottle of wine, and us guys had a couple of beers, and we started talking about ghosts and the supernatural. I want to make it clear, no one had more than 2 drinks before we finally called it a night. Our friends left, and I was going to hit the hay. Joe said he was going to stay up and play some GTA. I washed up, got into bed to read a little, and as I was doing that, I heard something out of place. There was a faint voice coming from my alarm clock. It was so quiet for the second time that night, I thought I was imagining it. I listened again, but it was there, very soft, and sounded like it was very far away. "Help me. Someone help me. I can't get back in." It said it once more, and then it didn't come back. I went out into the hallway to see if Joe was playing a prank, but he was in the bathroom. I just went back to bed. The next morning I told him about it, and he looked right at me and said, "I heard that too, right when I shut my game off. I got up to turn the TV off, and I heard the exact same thing." Even weirder, we weren't the only ones. Just then the phone rang, and it was Brooke. She asked if anything weird happened after they left our place, and said she had just talked to Lacey. Both of them heard this strange voice, too, that was saying, "Help me." Yeah, we were all wigged out for sure. Joe and I kept talking about it, and seeing as how it was a Saturday, we had time to kill. He said he thought he was putting one and one together, and maybe it had something to do with what we had been up to in the cemetery. It was a pretty nice day out, so we decided to go back to the cemetery and check out the vault where we heard the knocking. When we got there, it was sunny and unusually warm, but when we got to the vault, the wind picked up, the sun went away, and it started to rain. We looked at all the names on the vault, and I said, I wonder if that little boy was trying to get our attention. I memorized his name and the date of his passing, and said, hey, let's go to the library to see if we can find out what happened. The librarian was very helpful in getting some old newspapers that had been scanned and saved on CD-ROMs. She found the dates that we were looking for, and we went to one of the free computers. After a few minutes, we scanned them to find the obits, and sure enough, the day after he died, there was more than an obit. There was a story about him. He had been at a lake nearby with his parents, and they were closing up their cabin for the season. He had wandered off and decided he would get into their rowboat that was out on the dock. I don't know how it happened, but somehow he fell out and drowned. It all made sense now. That voice, help me, I can't get back in. Shivers ran down our spines, and we shut the computer down. Neither of us said a word on the way back to the apartment. I called Lacey and told her what we had found out, and there was silence on the other end. She said she'd call Brooke. I look back at this instance all the time, and not just on Halloween. Was that little boy trying to tell us something? Share what happened to him? I'm not super into the paranormal, but we experienced something that night that none of us can explain. It's such a sad story, I know. It's scary, and it's true. That really happened. Rest in peace, little guy. Hey gang, Hope you enjoyed this Halloween episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. Thanks to everyone who submitted a story, and hey, don't let that stop you here. Email any of your true scary stories to be narrated on my channel. I read them all. Send it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel, and make sure you hit the notification button because for whatever reason, YouTube is screwing that up again. If you're not following me on social media, please do. Links to that are in the description below. Leave a comment. I will get back to you as fast as I can. If you'd like to kick it up a notch and support the channel, you can also find a link to my Patreon page down there in the description. Everyone, have a wonderful Halloween. Be safe, wash your hands, wear your mask, social distance. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door. This episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories is brought to you by 3D Comics in Lancaster, New York. If you are a serious comic book collector, just starting out your collection, or maybe you're just a casual reader, then you have to check out 3D Comics in Lancaster, New York. From graded comics, custom art lithographs, limited edition prints and statues, 3D Comics is a must-see for the serious enthusiast, but the laid-back atmosphere is perfect for anyone with a love for comic books and more. They also specialize in custom art Funko Pops, taking regular Funko Pops and having a team of artists do original art on the boxes. Each comes with a certificate of authenticity. Located at 32 Central Ave in the heart of the village of historic Lancaster, New York, 3D Comics is open Wednesday through Saturday, 10 to 6, with special appointments available on Sundays. Find them online at 3dcomicsandmore.com. That's the number 3, the letter D, comicsandmore.com. And if you prefer to shop online, owner Joel Sharmani has tons of items available on eBay. Find a quick link to that on the shop's homepage. They also feature in-store appearances from today's hottest artists, special offers, and every Wednesday is New Comic Book Day. Give them a call at 716-860-7837, visit them online right now at 3dcomicsandmore.com, or better yet, just stop on in. But no matter where you are around the round world, 3D Comics is your destination for the best in comic books, custom art, and beyond. 3D Comics and More. That's the number 3, the letter D, comicsandmore.com. Tell them Uncle Josh sent you.